My grandfather was a survivor of a horrendous medical experiment at Auschwitz. My grandfather sat in his rocking chair, holding his body rigid like that of a corpse. His eyes looked like those of an old dog. His lips constantly chattered, and his fingers trembled with the Parkinson's that was eating him away like cancer. We both knew he didn't have long left. He looked at me with his strange yellow eyes and gave a weak grin.
"Elias, I think I should tell you the story of my childhood,"
my grandfather said, a single tear rolling down his cheek.
"I will tell you of what happened to me when I was only 13 years old, when I was sent to Auschwitz with my father by my side."
This is the story he told me, unbelievable as it is. Though my grandfather has been dead for years now, his story still stays with me to this day as an unbearable burden on my heart. I still remember the moment we arrived at the camp like it was yesterday. We were exhausted and starving. We had been on the cold cattle cars for 5 days and 5 nights, and we were given no food or water that entire time. Many of the sick and old died on the way. We moved their corpses to the corner of the car, and my father said Kaddish over their corpses. It was the first time I saw the light of life extinguished from the eyes of so many in so short a time, but it would be far from the last. Finally, long after the night had come, the doors to our cattle car slid open. Pale, starving creatures in striped black and white rags stood around SS soldiers in black, spotless uniforms. They grinned as the Death's Head insignia and sharp lightning bolt runes gleamed bright silver. The SS men all had vicious German shepherds who lunged at the frightened prisoners, gnashing and snapping at the air. I saw more than a few people get bit by the vicious dogs. They had deep bite wounds and chunks torn out of their flesh, and we all learned to avoid the dogs and the SS men as much as possible after that. In the dark night, we were formed into lines. Old women held the hands of their small grandchildren, and sons tried to stay with their fathers. We moved forward. Up ahead, I saw a man in a black SS uniform whistling a tune from Wagner. I would later realize that this man was Dr. Mengele. I tried to stay with my father. The surging crowds pulled us apart. I didn't know it at that moment, but I would never see my father again. If I had known, would I have acted differently? Would I have told them how much I loved him? I'll never know, but his ashes rose up in the air later that night, and I saw it from the freezing barracks in the place of shadows. Someone behind me whispered in my ear, "Hey, boy, how old are you?" 13, I said, turning to look at the strange figure. A starving man in a striped uniform. The man shook his head. "No, you're 16. When you get up there, remember that. You're not 13, you're 16. The man insisted. He was part of the prison commando that helped the SS with translating the many languages that streamed into the camp, and also helped them organize the prisoners for slave labor or death. I would never see that starving man again, but I followed his advice. As I got up to Dr. Mengele, he stopped whistling for just a couple seconds. The black cloudless sky hung heavy above us, the clouds of smoke rising up from the crematoria, with the smell of burning hair and searing flesh. Dr. Mengele gave me a fatherly smile, but in his eyes, there was something as cold as frozen steel, hiding just under the surface. I could see it. I could feel it in the air. I could almost smell it radiating off of his skin. It sent ice water racing through my veins. "Hello, son," he said in a warm voice as he gave a faint smile, though his eyes didn't smile, and as I think back on it, neither did his mouth. "What's your age?" 16, I said confidently, looking him straight in the eye. "Any physical deformities? Any illness?" he asked, the faint half smile like a statue of Buddha still plastered across his lips. I shook my head. "No, sir," I said. He nodded and pointed to the right. I didn't know if this was a good thing or a bad thing. I saw to my growing horror that most of the prisoners were going to the left, including all the elderly, all the children, anyone with disabilities, and anyone who looked too frail or emaciated. In all, about 90% of the line went to the left, and about 10% went to the right. Those who went to the left wouldn't live out the hour. They would be stripped naked, beaten, and bludgeoned to force as many people into the gas chamber as possible. Then the heavy metal door would be sealed. The Zyklon B pellets would be dropped into a vat of sulfuric acid, and the vents would turn on, whirring like hornets, breathing their deadly poison into the concrete tomb. The screams in the chamber often went on for over 20 minutes. The corpses would be intertwined in pyramids, their arms and legs caught together like rats in a rat king. The cyanide gas prevented their lips and fingernails from turning blue, and made the corpses look pink, almost healthy, except for their frozen, terrified death masks and sightless eyes. In 1944, while I was at Auschwitz-Birkenau, I was coming back late from a work detail in a nearby concrete factory with some other inmates. We passed through the freezing winds and whipping snow that bit like an ice pick into our bodies. There were open air pits that belched black smoke into the air constantly. What a world we lived in, where the graveyards rose into the sky and the blackness of space descended on those below. As I would learn later, the SS had a recent shortage of Zyklon B, the cyanide pellets used to exterminate masses of human beings and turn them into ash and fetid, reeking smoke. The advances of the Red Army had caused issues with delivering it, and a transport of children had just come into the camp. The SS men in the capos loaded these children, most of whom were no older than 7 or 8, onto the beds of 2 dump trucks, beating them with truncheons and kicking and punching them. When the crying, bloody children were finally all settled in on the back of the dump trucks, they had drivers back them up towards the inferno of burning bodies. I watched, horrified, as they slowly angled the beds downwards. The children began sliding out with horrible, wretched screams. They fell into the pit of fire. I watched their hair burn, their skin blacken and sizzle, the drops of fat melt and drip off their shrieking lips. Some of them tried to crawl out, but the black-clad SS men went around with long sticks and pushed the half-dead, writhing children back into the scorching flames. My grandson, I tell you truthfully that this is what I saw with my own eyes, heard with my own ears, when I was only 13 years old. Sometimes, late at night, I think I still hear those children screaming as their bodies burned and blackened. Is it any wonder, then, that I almost never sleep, and when I do, I wake up shrieking as mountains of pale, burning corpses flash across my mind. One day, during selection, I saw Dr. Mengele again. He looked me up and down and wrote something on a clipboard. Later that day, I was told by the capo that I would be moved to the medical ward.
The medical ward?
I asked, confused.
Why? I'm not sick.
The doctor requests your presence, the capo said sarcastically, giving me a little bow. He was a fat man, with a face like a bulldog and red hands like a butcher. He loved to beat and rob the prisoners under him.
Move, scum. Double time. Get your ass to the medical barracks.
I didn't need to be told twice. I quickly scurried away, constantly glancing back to make sure no blows from his fat hands would rain down on my head. I wound my way through the bare, wooden barracks that acted as our homes. The homes were walking skeletons of men whose bodies were frozen and dying. Within these barracks, we were often packed so tightly together on the hard wooden planks that one man couldn't turn around in the night without every other man in the row having to move. But when the freezing winter cold blew in and we only had thin blankets and our black and white striped rags, the body heat from the others kept us from freezing to death. At least, some of the time. Corpses were taken out of the barracks every morning. Prisoners who died from the cold, from hunger, from dysentery or disease, from beatings and murders and suicides. It was like a constant stream of death, a waterfall of oblivion crashing forward. The corpses came, but the fire ate them all greedily, and exhaled only fetid black smoke in response. I walked into the medical barracks, sat on a chair, waiting. I saw my friend from the work commando, Masha. His dark, serious eyes stared through me, as if he didn't see me. He had a straight nose and high cheekbones on his aristocratic face. Though now he looked as pale and starved as I did myself, no more than a bag of bones wrapped in skin and clad in rags.
Eliezer,
Masha said, suddenly realizing I was there.
Were you chosen for this too?
I nodded grimly, not knowing what he was referring to, but feeling in my heart it was nothing good. Nothing good ever came from this camp after all. Nothing but reeking smoke and ashes came from it. Nothing but the hurricane of souls whipped away and the currents of the Zyklon B came from it.
Do you know why we're here?
I asked, fidgeting and nervous. I glanced around, seeing a clean, well-stocked medical room beyond with a surgical table in the middle. There were bunks in the back of the medical barracks where the lucky ones would live. We even got increased rations of sawdust bread and watery soup.
Dr. Mengele wants us,
Masha said simply, and his eyes looked through me again. His mind seemed to drift off, far away from this world of suffering. My emaciated body was such a heavy thing. It felt like the weight of the entire universe was contained within that body. I despised that body, that starving, sickly thing that followed me like a shadow. I wanted to be free of it, to see the highest reality without a body, to see truth without this constant suffering and agony, the constant hunger and cold and beatings and the stench of death. But it wasn't to be. Dr. Mengele walked into the barracks a few minutes later, surrounded by female nurses clad in white. He looked at me and Masha. His cold blue eyes sparkled with intelligence. He always kept his black SS uniform perfectly cleaned and ironed. It gave an impression that some black knight from a lost tale of the Dark Ages had just wandered in. He held the clipboard in his hand. He glanced down at it, frowning. Then he spoke in clipped German.
A9971 and A8991. You are hereby required to participate in a medical experiment that will test the effects of certain drugs on the body. We do this under the authority of Greater German Reich and our Reichsführer, SS Himmler. You will stay here in the medical barracks until the experiment is ended,
Dr. Mengele said. As soon as he was done, he walked briskly over to the dark room with a surgical table. He came back out with 2 syringes filled with some black fluid that shone with glittering rainbows. He came up to me first.
A9971, your arm,
Dr. Mengele demanded. I stretched out my arm. He applied a tourniquet. When the vein throbbed like a fat worm, he plunged a needle inside and pressed down on the plunger. I felt something like lava ripping its way through my body as my breath caught in my throat. I thought I was choking and dying. My heart beat so fast in my chest that I feared it must explode. Dr. Mengele walked over to Masha as my vision turned white. I groaned, my teeth chattering, and then I fell forward onto the wooden floor. I must have lost consciousness, because when I awoke, it was night in the medical barracks. I found myself laying on a bunk. A small serving of sawdust bread and thin, watery soup was laid down next to me. Still sleeping, I saw the form of Masha, his face as pale as a skull.
Masha?
I whispered, trying to push myself to my feet. My head throbbed. I looked down at my arm, seeing a sprouting patch of black and necrotic tissue spreading from the injection site. It almost looked like shiny scales were spreading across my arm. I looked down at Masha's arm and saw the same dark patches there.
Wake up, Masha. Please. I need you. I need someone. I can't do this alone.
But in my heart, I knew that we were all born alone, and we all died alone. Masha couldn't help me with anything. Even God couldn't help me here. He didn't listen to our prayers or hear the Kaddish read for the dead. He had turned his face away from us, and every dying heart there felt that great emptiness as the life was extinguished from their eyes. I shook Masha gently, not wanting to scare him. His eyes flew open. He looked up at me, and I saw with horror that something was wrong. His eyes had become slitted and yellow, like the eyes of a serpent. He hissed at me. A thin stream of frothy blood bubbled up from his throat as he gurgled, pushing himself up like a zombie.
What's happened to you?
I asked in a panic, backpedaling away from the transformed Masha. He looked like a rabid animal, his eyes gleaming with insanity. He came at me, and his teeth looked longer, sharper, more predatory. They looked like fangs. He leapt off the bunk, soaring through the air towards me. As he gnashed his teeth, I frantically tried to push him away. His jaw snapped together with a crack like a bullwhip. He lunged forward and his bleached white face came down. I felt the skin on my face tear with a pain like fire spreading through my head. He bit down on my cheek and ripped upwards, leaving a mutilated flap of skin hanging there. I felt something hot and poisonous coursing through my bloodstream, but unlike Masha, I had not gone insane. I felt my teeth lengthening, though, and my eyes abruptly adjusted to the dark. I could see every mote of dust floating through the air, see every spatter of blood on the swept wooden floors. A hiss tore its way out of my throat. My arm lunged forward as if with a mind of its own. Sharp claws ripped their way out of the ends of my fingers as I threw Masha off of me. He ran out into the night, hissing and wailing, his forked tongue flicking out between his bloody lips. A few moments later, I heard SS men yelling at the nearby perimeter, and then guns started firing. The banshee wail from Masha grew louder, and the SS men screamed, their voices filled with panic and terror. I staggered out of the medical barracks, seeing Masha clawing and biting at the black-clad form of an SS man. 2 others laid dead next to him, their throats torn out, the mutilated flesh sliced wide open. Masha leapt off the dying SS man and loped towards the electrified fence. In horror and astonishment, I watched him swipe at it with his claws. It gave a loud pop of electricity, and I saw a flash of blue light, but the black scales that now covered almost all of Masha's skin only seemed to glow brighter, gleaming like obsidian. Masha remained unaffected. He ripped a hole in the fence as it continued sizzling, leapt over the razor wire, and disappeared into the dark forest of Poland beyond. After a long moment staring at the bodies of the SS men, I ran forwards towards freedom as well, following the trail of Masha. I still had my mind, however. Whatever poison Dr. Mengele had given us hadn't affected me like it had affected Masha. But still, I noticed I was healing faster. The deep gash on my cheek stopped bleeding within minutes, and a layer of thin black scale started to cover the wound. Over the next few weeks, I made my way to Switzerland, where I spent the rest of the war. But I heard rumors in the forest of Poland that there was a strange creature attacking isolated farms and houses. A creature with slitted eyes, like a serpent's, and black scales covering his deformed, twisted body. My grandfather stopped speaking suddenly, looking up at me with glazed eyes.
"Do you believe it, Elias?"
he asked.
"Do you believe what I've told you?"
I nodded. He pulled up his sleeves, and there, on his arms, I saw black scales covering his skin all the way to the wrists.